Hi there, Patrick Peace here. Wanted to finish up my review of Chapter 8 from the God Delusion while it's still fresh in my mind. The Chapter 8, this could be in a book called The Religious Delusion or The Delusion of Religion, because that's mostly what this chapter is talking about. It could have been written by a person of any faith. This chapter could have been written by a Christian, except for some portions where he goes off into his tangent on evolution, which doesn't contribute to the chapter at all. But in this sense, it is much different from the selfish gene, which I still hold as essentially useless and unproductive for anybody to read, simply based on assumption. I mean, his assumption of the foundation of the creation of life. It's based on nothing. This book actually is a good admonition, and I would even be willing to go so far as recommend it as good reading for Christians to wake them up and to keep them focused on what's important, which are the instructions of Christ, and not the religion of Christianity per se that has been built up around the life of Christ. The Christian religion itself needs to be admonished by writings such as this particular chapter. He uses the phrase American Taliban quite often in this chapter. Absolutism, he talks about, leads to thought crime and unnecessary persecution. He gives examples of people like Alan Turing, a horrible story, Fred Phelps, a fellow full of hatred, Randall Terry, who I'd never heard of before, and who unfortunately was a horrible murderer based on his religious convictions, unfortunately. He was subject to poisonous religious nonsense. Well, that's a fact. But at the same time, he does. He goes on to talk about the whole abortion question, and he presents the horrible stories of that, and deservedly so. But he also makes a note in the footnote that a substantial majority of American Christians do not take an absolutist attitude to abortion and are pro-choice. And so I have to tip my hat to Richard Dawkins for maintaining a healthy level of fair coverage. Even though it's relegated to a footnote, he does admit that most people hold that view, most American Christians, which is the only thing that salvages this chapter for the Christian. He brings in, at the bottom of page 300, he brings in the idea of pro-life, saying that the humanness, he says, the humanness of an embryo cell cannot confer upon it any absolutely discontinuous moral status. It cannot, he says, because of our evolutionary continuity with chimpanzees. I'm not going to comment on that. It warns against, this is the problem here, in 306, now to sum everything up, I agree with the chapter, I agree with his admonitions, and they're very sobering and very eye-opening to the dangers of mindless following of dogma. This is a danger that we all should be aware of and take seriously, as I do. And so for that, I am very thankful to Richard Dawkins. He's rattled my cage with this chapter, as he did with the previous chapter on what was it? Well, I'm not going to get distracted, but he has come up with some very good issues here. But now look at page 306, right near the end of the chapter. And in the end of the chapter, he bravely finally shifts his emphasis away from Christianity and places it squarely on the Muslim religion. So I have to again, give him kudos for his bravery, because otherwise the entire chapter would have been directed at Christian absolutism. He says he wants to warn against faith itself. Moderate religion, he says, is an open invitation to extremism. So he's against extremism, but he also says that even moderate religion is an open invitation to extremism, and so he wants to warn against faith itself. Yet, does he not realize, does Richard Dawkins not realize that his entire theory of evolution is based on faith? His entire book, The Selfish Gene, is based on faith. He has blind faith in the origin of life itself, which he assumes just had to happen that way. It just had to happen out of nothingness. So he has blind faith, and his own dogma, his own foundations for atheism have formed into their own type of religion. It's an exclusive club. It's part of the intellectual elite. They have their in club and out club, and they accept members within their club, and it follows all the characteristics of a religion, and it would also be subject to the same dangers that any moderate religion would have. So taking atheism can lead to blind, ferocious eugenic theories, just as it did for Marx, and just as it did for Stalin, just as it did for Hitler. Those people followed the atheist religion, and they used that as a springboard for their extremist views. So we're talking pots and kettles here. If Dawkins is going to try and wipe out anything that is faith-based, because his own religion, his own views on adaptive selection and Darwinian evolution are based on his faith in the creation of life. A person can be a Christian and still believe in evolution. A person can be a Christian and still believe in adaptive selection, because that's just based on the physical observation of our reality. There's nothing wrong with that. But to take it a step further and to take it to the point of the creation of life and the creation of our reality itself, that is a faith-based proposition. Whether it's an atheist or a Christian or a Muslim, it doesn't matter. The person has to have faith for their foundational understanding of where life comes from. Enough said. So I finished chapter 8. I'm going to move on to chapter 9, which is interesting because it says that it's about children, and he wants to indoctrinate children. I watched his podcast on Joe Rogan, and he said that he was fighting with his publisher because he wanted to be able to indoctrinate children with his faith, his faith in atheism and his faith in Darwinian evolution. So we're going to be having pots calling kettles black again for some time by the looks of it. But chapter 8 is done. I wanted to make commentary on it while it's still fresh in my mind, and to return to the topic of the personal individual experience. The words of Christ never promoted a religion. The words of Christ never promoted extremism. The words of Christ never promoted when he kicked the people out of the temple. And even that is a reflection of the importance of the temple of our minds, that we should get rid of anything that subverts an acknowledgement and an understanding that God loves us and created us and wants us to be happy and wants us to love one another. This was the message, but I'm not going to get into that. The fact of the words of Christ directing us and telling us that God is real, that God exists, this message should direct any individual towards an admonition towards loving their neighbor, loving themselves, loving their fellow man. He talks about the prosecution of homosexuals, and this shouldn't be happening. He talks about the prosecution of abortion doctors. That shouldn't be happening. If somebody has fed on the words of Christ and makes them a part of their mind, they should have an understanding that love is the most important thing. Love for one another. And kind support and encouragement of one another should be the most important thing in any circumstance. And those things are not so easy to see when you see the extremism that occurs from unbridled religious dogma, which I agree with Dawkins wholeheartedly with this chapter, that it's not something that is beneficial to society. It's not something that's beneficial to humanity. And so a very good chapter, excellent chapter. I recommend reading it. It's worthwhile to check it out and to return again to say, okay, what's important here? Why am I a Christian? Am I a Christian because I believe in the Bible, or am I a Christian because I follow Christ? And those are two very, very different things. And in fact, I have to thank Richard Dawkins for helping me to clarify that in my own mind. Because when I see the extremism that can easily happen with unbridled dogma just for the sake of because it's in the Bible, that's not a good thing at all. So with that, I'm on the same page as he is in this particular chapter, and I'm glad that I took this on as a task to evaluate it as objectively as I possibly can. Being a Christian myself, I want to follow Christ. I want to follow his words. I want to follow his instructions. But I'm not a Christian in the sense of the types that he's talking about in here. This unbridled, uncontrolled frenzy of perverse hatred is what it can be described as. There's no benefit to living that way or thinking that way or trying to kill people simply because they don't agree with your particular religion. That's never good. That's not a good thing. So kudos to Richard Dawkins. That's an excellent chapter, and almost ready to move on. I've only got 2 chapters left, 9 and 10, and hopefully I can get through those in the next couple of days. Worthwhile reading, and I definitely agree with a lot of what he's saying in that particular chapter. Thanks a lot for watching. God bless you. I pray that you're doing well. I pray you have a good day. Take care now. Bye-bye.